Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're doing something a little different. We're moving beyond just, reporting the news.
That's right.
We're actually stepping into the classroom, metaphorically speaking, putting on our instructor hats, and we're performing a really structured, almost forensic analysis of one of the most, frankly, chilling critical infrastructure failures in recent memory.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Our mission here, yours and mine, is to dissect this event not just as reporters looking at what happened, but really as educators, trying to extract every single instructional lesson we possibly can.
That's the critical difference today, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're pulling apart this document, the one detailing the Blackout Winter.
Sure.
It was this massive cyber siege that led to a power collapse affecting millions, just millions.
Unbelievable scale.
And we need to understand not just the what, but the why. Why did all these established layers of defense, why did they fail?
Yeah.
And sequentially, one after another.
It's like dominoes falling. So our case study, the focus, is Dnipro. This was a major power distributor over in Eastern Europe, responsible for, I think the figure was, lighting up the lives of over 5 million people. Huge responsibility.
Absolutely huge. And the antagonist in this, well, this tragedy really, is the state-sponsored Advanced Persistent Threat Group, the APT. We've dubbed them Vostok.
Vostok, okay.
And understanding Vostok's motivation, that's absolutely the starting point for any successful threat modeling exercise.
Yeah.
You have to know your enemy.
Right.
And this wasn't about money. This wasn't financially motivated ransomware. It wasn't corporate espionage trying to steal secrets. No, this was pure geopolitical action.
So state-level objectives.
Precisely. Their objective was destabilization. Sowing chaos, demonstrating decisive power, maybe using infrastructure collapse as a really powerful precursor to potential hybrid warfare operations down the line.
Wow.
So when Vostok targeted Dnipro, they didn't just want data or money. They wanted to extinguish the power grid itself, turn the lights off.
Literally turn the lights off.
Yeah.
So to understand how they pulled off this catastrophic success, we've broken down the narrative. The source material lays it out pretty clearly, actually. 3 acts, almost like a play.
A tragedy, as you said.
Yeah, a 3-act tragedy. So we'll start with the months, maybe longer, of subtle preparation in part 1, the silent invasion. And here, our focus instructionally is on the fundamental failure of threat modeling.
Getting that initial assessment wrong.
Exactly. Then we're going to move to part 2, the failing sentinels. And there we'll dissect the systematic collapse of security monitoring. Why didn't they see them?
The eyes and ears failed.
Right. And finally, we analyze the devastating technical execution, how they actually did it. That's part 3. The day the lights went out. We'll look at the attack methods they used.
And throughout this, we're looking for those intervention points, right? What could Dnipro have done differently at each stage? Where were the off-ramps they missed?
Yeah, what were the lessons they should have learned? And that we can learn now.
Okay, so let's begin where all great security strategy and, frankly, all great failure starts. Understanding the enemy and understanding the landscape they attacked.
Okay, part 1, the silent invasion. And the first lesson, it jumps right out of the gate, doesn't it? It's the danger of, operational complacency.
Oh, absolutely.
The source material makes it painfully clear. Dnipro as a company was just laser focused on operational continuity, keeping the lights on day to day.
Which is understandable for a power company.
It is, but they were overworked, they were managing aging physical assets and their security posture. It felt very checklist-driven, focused primarily on just meeting baseline compliance mandates, shoring up the main firewall.
Check boxes.
Exactly, ticking boxes. And the critical point here is they hadn't performed a comprehensive, and actionable threat modeling exercise specifically tailored to a high-level geopolitical adversary in over 2 years.
And that right there, that's the open gate. It really is.
Yeah.
Compliance measures, they're the floor. They're not the ceiling of security. They're the bare minimum.
Right.
And when you're focused only on those external kind of common threats, maybe script kiddies or basic ransomware, and you failed to actively model the specific high-capability threats actually targeting you, well, you're prepared for yesterday's attackers, never tomorrow's.
So they were ready for a fight that wasn't coming.
Pretty much. So let's profile the adversary they should have been modeling. Vostok. What do they look like?
This group, Vostok, they fundamentally changed the rules of engagement, don't they? Can you elaborate a bit on the scale, the resources, the timeline they work on?
Yeah, when we talk about Vostok or any similar state-sponsored APT, you're talking high capability, almost near limitless resources, relatively speaking. They're state-funded.
Right.
That means they can afford to employ highly skilled engineers, not just hackers, but software developers. They can develop custom, novel malware that isn't in any AV signature database. They can build and utilize sophisticated, dedicated infrastructure that just blends seamlessly into global cloud networks. Hard to spot.
And patience. You mentioned patience.
Crucially, extreme patience. Their operational timeline isn't measured in hours or days. It's measured in months, sometimes years. They aren't executing some quick smash-and-grab ransomware attack over a weekend. They're establishing a long-term, persistent presence. Think of it like espionage, but digital.
Wow.
And technically, they are masters of creating sophisticated zero-day exploits, finding those unknown vulnerabilities. And, most importantly, in this specific case, they specialize in supply chain attacks, hitting the vendors, the partners.
Okay, so that's key. They weren't looking for that quick hit at the main gate, the firewall.
No, too noisy.
They understood that hitting the primary firewall was probably a high-risk move, likely to trip an immediate alarm, right? So they looked elsewhere. They sought the weakest link in the chain.
Precisely. They started by performing a very methodical, structured threat assessment, probably using frameworks like MITRE ATT and CK, maybe others, to systematically map out potential approaches. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where are the soft spots? And instead of trying to brute force that hardened perimeter, they identified a far softer target. It was a specialized industrial control system ICS monitoring software package.
Okay.
And this software, critically, was developed by a small German vendor, a company likely with fewer resources, maybe less rigid internal security practices than Dnipro Energo itself. That vendor became the designated soft underbelly, the way in.
That makes perfect sense. And that leads us right into the next crucial discussion point. Understanding the target itself, the attack surface determination. I found it really remarkable reading this, how Dnipro Energo's own internal architecture had sort of metastasized, grown complex, without the security team truly grasping the new risks involved.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Growth outpaces security understanding. They were managing a pretty dangerous hybrid environment. On one side, you had their traditional legacy operational technology, the OT environment.
The physical stuff.
Yeah, the SCADA systems, the PLCs, the things that physically run the grid. That stuff tends to be, or is supposed to be, air-gapped or at least heavily segmented from the business network. But on the other side, to improve efficiency, they'd recently added new, modern, cloud-based analytics platforms. These were running on the standard information technology network, the IT side, doing things like grid load prediction, optimization.
So IT and ODT starting to blend.
Exactly. And this architectural expansion, this blend, was fully mapped out by vStock. They likely used techniques like data flow mapping to understand exactly how information moved between these systems. And that mapping exposed the critical risk.
Which was the trust boundary vulnerability, right? That necessary connection, the bridge between the IT world and the OT world.
Correct. You hit the nail on the head. For that IT network to run analytics on grid data, or for engineers sitting at corporate desks to remotely monitor the grid status, some connection, a sort of necessary evil bridge, has to exist between the corporate network and the industrial control network.
You need data to flow.
You need data to flow. Now, this bridge ideally requires complex authentication, data sanitization, all sorts of controls. But fundamentally, it's still a conduit built on some level of trust between the two environments. And Vostok knew if they could gain a foothold on the IT side, the business side, they could potentially use that established, trusted bridge to jump laterally, to pivot into the much more sensitive OT side.
Got it. So let's detail the actual invasion mechanism then. They zeroed in on that German vendor, and they successfully executed a supply chain attack. How did they manage to make sure that the malicious update they pushed was, well, completely invisible to Dnipro Energo's defenses?
It was masterful deception, really. Very clever. Vostok compromised the German vendor's update server, the place where Dnipro Energo would naturally go to get software patches and updates.
Standard procedure.
Totally standard. And they injected a sophisticated implant, their malware, into what looked like a perfectly routine maintenance software package.
Yeah.
A bug fix, a minor update, something nobody would question.
Okay.
But the critical layer of trust they exploited was the digital signature. That malicious code wasn't just slipped in. It was signed using the vendor's legitimate cryptographic certificate, which Vostok must have stolen previously.
Oh, wow. So to Dnipro Energo.
To every perimeter defense, every endpoint antivirus, every operating system check at Dnipro Energo, this implant looked completely legitimate. It was authorized, it seemed benign, it even seemed like necessary software from a trusted partner. So it wasn't detected, it was installed, pulled in willingly by the victim.
That is terrifying. And here's where the preparation, the silent invasion, moves into this really modern realm, the calculated use of AI and machine learning threats, specifically through data poisoning. And this wasn't about causing an immediate crash, was it? It was something more insidious.
Much more insidious. The subtlety is the genius here, the evil genius perhaps. Dnipro Energo relied on a machine learning model, likely running on their IT network for accurate grid load prediction and optimization, trying to be efficient.
Makes sense.
The implant, once it was installed and operational via that trusted update, began introducing data poisoning. But it wasn't like flooding the system with obviously corrupt data that would trigger alarms. No, it was minute, subtle manipulation of the real sensory data flowing from the grid itself into that ML model.
How subtle are we talking?
We're talking about slightly inflating load readings in one geographical quadrant, while maybe deflating voltage data just slightly in an adjacent one. Tiny tweaks. Consistent, but tiny.
And the result of these tiny tweaks was a slow erosion of confidence designed to look like normal system wear and tear.
Exactly. The ML model, which is designed to learn from the data it sees, began learning from this subtly corrupted input. Over time, this led to increasingly inaccurate predictions, maybe even contradictory recommendations coming out of the model.
But not obviously wrong.
Not obviously wrong. Because the change was so gradual, so nuanced, the human operators looking at the output or the engineers looking at the sensor readings, they didn't immediately flag a massive security breach. They interpreted it as normal system drift.
Oh, okay.
You know, the kind of expected minor fluctuations you get from aging physical infrastructure, maybe sensors needing calibration, or just expected environmental changes affecting demand. It looked like noise, not signal.
So it confused the operators.
It confused the operators. And crucially, it conditioned the Security Operations Center, the SOC, to start dismissing minor sensor discrepancy alerts later on. They'd already seen months of this drift. The psychological warfare was already well underway, even before the main attack.
Okay, let's quickly map this initial phase, this whole silent invasion, against the traditional kill chain model, just to understand the methodical, patient timeline involved here.
Sure. It clearly follows the pattern. The whole operation likely started with months, maybe even longer, of passive reconnaissance, just watching, mapping the target network, identifying key vendors like the German software house, maybe identifying key personnel through social engineering or public records, observing the IT/OT boundaries, all very quiet.
Then the active part begins.
Right. Then you move into weaponization. That's where they likely paired a zero-day vulnerability they discovered in that vendor's software with a custom-built backdoor, creating that weaponized update package. Delivery was almost effortless in this case because the compromised, legitimate vendor update server served the poison file directly to Dnipro Energo. They pulled it in themselves.
Then exploitation and installation.
Exploitation and installation happened when Dnipro Energo applied that update. That secured Vstock's persistent presence, their initial foothold, on the corporate IT network.
And this leads to the really critical phase for long-term operations, command and control, C2, establishing that hidden channel back to base.
Yeah, and they were smart about this too. They avoided using known hostile IP addresses or domains that might be on block lists. Instead, the implant was configured to beacon out to communicate with what looked like a perfectly innocuous, legitimate cloud storage server, maybe AWS S3, maybe Azure Blob Storage, something common.
Blending in with normal traffic.
Perfectly. The C2 traffic was encrypted, of course, and it just blended seamlessly with all the other legitimate corporate cloud usage that was likely happening, meaning it sailed right past most network monitoring devices without raising any flags.
And this hidden channel gave them,
What?
months?
Months, at least. Months to execute their initial actions on objectives from within the IT network. Quietly mapping the interior network architecture, escalating their privileges by finding weakly protected credentials, identifying those crucial engineering workstations that bridged IT and OT, and locating the specific programmable logic controllers, PLCs, out in the substations that they would eventually need to target for the final attack.
So the conclusion for part one, the threat modeling failure, it seems pretty unforgiving.
It is.
The security team's threat models, their attack trees, their abuse cases, they were apparently geared towards those generic external attacks. Hackers trying to breach the firewall, maybe standard malware. They weren't adequately modeling or prepared for a sophisticated supply chain infiltration, or, critically, the persistent internal residence of a patient, well-resourced nation-state actor like Vostok.
They were watching the front door.
Exactly. Dnipro-Energo focused so hard on the threat outside the wall that they effectively ensured Vostok's months of quiet lateral movement inside the network went completely, utterly undetected. Okay, so the perimeter failed, the attackers are inside. Now, assuming that happens, which, let's be honest, is always a possibility against a determined adversary.
Assume breach, right?
So assume breach. The next line of defense should be detection. The organization should still have caught Vostok during that extended dwell time, those months they were poking around inside.
Absolutely. That's what the SOC is for.
But the Security Operations Center, the SOC at Dnipro-Energo was, well, the source material suggests it was fatally crippled. Mainly by two things: poor data collection practices and just overwhelming alert fatigue.
Yeah, this failure of detection, the failure of the Sentinels, it's incredibly instructive because it really highlights this common and dangerous cultural and technical chasm between traditional IT security and OT security.
The two worlds not talking.
Pretty much. We often call the situation they had at Dnipro-Energo the Tower of Babel problem when it comes to data collection. They had lots of data, potentially, but it wasn't integrated. They couldn't speak the same language, electronically speaking, or bring it all together intelligently to get a single picture.
Can you elaborate on the specific blind spots this created? What data were they missing or not correlating?
Absolutely. So think about it. The corporate IT network, logs, logins, file access, web traffic, yeah, they were being collected, probably. The logs from those new cloud platforms they'd added, also collected, mostly. But often in proprietary formats, maybe only partially integrated into their central SIEM system.
The SIEM being the main security dashboard.
Right, the Security Information and Event Management Platform. That's the brain that's supposed to correlate all this data and find the threats. But here's the giant hole. The most vital data, the logs from the Industrial Control Systems, ICS, and the SCADA systems, the stuff detailing physical actions and states on the grid, that data wasn't integrated at all. It was coming from what we call non-reporting devices, trapped securely, supposedly, within the OT network. These devices, the PLCs, the sensors, they weren't sending their logs to the IT-based SIEM. So the SIEM was effectively blind to what was happening on the actual grid control layer.
Okay, so when Vostok used those stolen credentials, a classic internal attacker maneuver to move laterally, to jump from the compromised IT side over to those specialized engineering workstations, the ones that could talk to the OT network. The SIEM was basically useless.
It was worse than useless, in a way. It was actively misleading. The technique Vostok used was simple lateral movement. Find credentials, log into a new machine. They specifically targeted these engineering workstations because they were the known, legitimate control points for the grid, the bridge.
Right.
So when the SIEM registered that activity, what did it see? It saw a valid user login using valid credentials from a known corporate IP address accessing a perfectly legitimate engineering terminal. Nothing inherently suspicious there in isolation.
It lacked context.
Completely lacked context. It didn't have the OT data to say, hey, this login correlates with weird commands being sent to substation X. It also lacked the necessary behavioral context to flag it as suspicious, especially when maybe that login happened at 3 a.m. or when it was correlated potentially with that subtle encrypted C2 traffic still trickling out of the network. The SIEM simply didn't possess the OT data or, frankly, the sophisticated behavioral baseline to scream alert. This is wrong.
Okay, so the analytics, the brain behind the SIEM, it just lacked sophistication. You're saying Vostok basically became the ghost in the normal because the SOC's behavioral benchmarking was designed for the wrong type of user, the wrong environment.
That's spot on. Most traditional SIEMs, or at least how they're often configured, establish a baseline based on standard office worker activity. Logins between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., average data usage per day, typical application usage like email and web browsing, predictable patterns. The Dnipro-Energo SOC apparently trying to apply this kind of rigid office worker benchmarking to its industrial environment. But that doesn't work. Grid operators, control engineers, they operate in complex, variable, often 247 environments. They need to troubleshoot late at night. They need to access strange ports to talk to legacy equipment. They need to transfer large schematic files or diagnostic data on unusual schedules. It's normal for them.
So Vostok just blended in.
Vostok clearly studied these complex, variable, but ultimately accepted normal patterns of the engineers and operators, and they deliberately operated within those bounds, accessing systems at times engineers might, transferring data sizes engineers might. By doing that, they achieved complete operational stealth within the network. They look like just another busy engineer.
This must have fed directly into the next huge problem, alert fatigue and correlation failure. Because those subtle data poisoning effects we talked about earlier, the ones causing minor system drift, they would have started generating some low-level technical symptoms, right? Some alerts.
They did. Those low-priority alerts, things flagged as sensor discrepancies or minor data inconsistencies, those were actually the earliest detectable signs of the internal compromise linked back to the data poisoning. But what happened?
Dismissed as noise.
Exactly. They were dismissed as expected false positives, attributed to that aging physical infrastructure they already knew about, or maybe sensor calibration issues. The SOC, which was likely already overwhelmed by a constant deluge of minor, often unactionable alerts from the IT side, password lockouts, printer errors, you name it. They'd adopted a policy, maybe implicitly, of tuning out the noise, especially low-priority noise.
The boy who cried wolf effect.
Precisely. And the profound failure here, the technical failure underpinning the fatigue, was the inability of the SIEM's correlation and prioritization engine to connect the dots. It couldn't link those minor physical sensor alerts to the symptom with, say, a suspicious PowerShell script using elevated privileges that was run by a user from an unusual workstation an hour prior the potential cause. They were just disconnected data points in the security dashboard. No context, no correlation, no priority bump.
Wow. And there was, according to the source, one specific incident, one enormous missed siren that, in hindsight, should have stopped the entire attack right there. It seems like it detailed the attacker actively preparing the final payloads.
Yeah, this is a moment that, reading the forensics, it truly haunts you. Because it was so blatant if the context had been understood. The SIEM did register a login attempt using the credentials of a recently terminated employee.
Huge red flag right there.
Massive red flag. That alone should trigger alarms. This was immediately followed by that same compromised account attempting to access a specific, highly sensitive substation schematic database, the blueprints for the grid control points.
Oh, yeah.
Then, moments later, came a large data transfer. We're talking maybe 100 megabytes or more from that same session, going out to an external IP address. It might have looked like benign cloud storage, but still, exfiltration after accessing critical data from a terminated account.
Any security professional looking at that sequence?
Any security professional would categorize that chain of events as an immediate P1 critical incident. Investigate NLW. Shut down that account and another phone.
The system, the automated system, categorized it as only medium priority. And it got lost in a queue. How? Why did the system fail to recognize the sheer gravity of that threat?
It boils down to a failure in criticality assessment within the analytics. The security analytics, the rules in the SAM, they fail to understand the business context, the operational significance of the data involved. Substation schematics are not just files. They are the blueprints for potential destruction in the wrong hands.
Right.
But because the SAM's rules were likely based on generic data classification policies, so file size, file type, maybe basic keywords, and not tied to specific asset intelligence about what that database actually contained in its physical consequence, it essentially treated the transfer of a 100 megabyte critical schematic file the same as it might treat someone uploading a 100 megabyte PowerPoint presentation to their personal cloud drive.
Unbelievable.
So that alert flagged only as medium priority because it didn't tick the confidential financial data box or something similar. It got lost. Lost in a nightly queue of maybe 200 other less significant medium priority alerts. The attacker literally stole the keys to the entire kingdom, walked out the door with them, and the system merely shrugged and put a note in a very long queue.
This systematic failure of detection, this blindness, it led directly to what the source vividly calls the illusion of security. It explains how the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO, could go to the board, go to management, and report metrics that actually looked good.
Yeah, the reports probably highlighted things like high firewall blockage rates, we stopped 10 million attacks this month, or minimal reported system downtime, maybe a low count of confirmed critical security incidents because nothing had actually blown up yet.
Measuring the wrong things.
Measuring diligence, perhaps, but not actual defense effectiveness against a sophisticated internal threat. The metrics painted this dangerous illusion of comprehensive visibility and control, but it completely masked the horrifying reality. Vostok was inside, moving freely. They were mapping every critical circuit. They were identifying the target systems. They were preparing the final software payloads for the key programmable logic controllers, PLCs, at multiple crucial substations. And they were just waiting patiently for the political signal to strike. The Sentinels weren't just failing. They were effectively asleep at their posts while actively reporting success back to HQ. all while the adversary slept soundly, already deep inside the walls.
Okay, so the months of silent preparation, the undetected movement, it all ended instantly when the command was given from Vostok leadership. And the source material is pretty clear here, confirming the political motive was the fuse. The order to actually execute the attack followed a specific known diplomatic event. I think it was an expulsion of diplomats.
Yeah, it wasn't random time.
No, this wasn't a random event. It was clearly a calculated geopolitical escalation. And what's truly damning, instructionally speaking, as we get into this section, is that the actual lights-out event, the final attack, it was executed almost entirely using known, often decades-old, attack methods. Methods that Dnipro could have mitigated but simply hadn't addressed.
That's the tragic irony. No super advanced sci-fi techniques were needed for the final blow, just exploitation of fundamental weaknesses. The initial action, though, the very first step in the active attack, it was quite sophisticated. It was designed specifically to maximize stress on the human operators in the control room and simultaneously disable the automated countermeasures that might have fought back.
Okay, what did they do first?
They started with a very surgical strike, something the report calls a model denial of service, DIS attack, specifically targeting that AI load balancer we discussed earlier.
How does a model DOS differ from a traditional network layer DOS, like a SYN flood?
Good question. A traditional network DOS just overwhelms a server with junk traffic, trying to exhaust its network capacity or resources. This was different. This was a model DOS. Vostok leveraged the existing data poisoning infrastructure they'd built, maybe using their C2 channel, to inject a pre-crafted malicious data spike directly into the input stream of the AI load balancing model.
Ah, attacking the model's logic.
Exactly. This crafted input was specifically designed to represent an impossible, highly contradictory grid scenario, something that completely exceeded the trained boundaries and safety parameters of the machine learning model. The AI, faced with input it literally could not compute or reconcile, immediately experienced a critical failure. It crashed.
And the effect of that crash?
It instantly stripped away the automated load distribution capabilities. The system that was supposed to automatically balance power across the grid was suddenly offline. This immediately forced the human operators, who were likely already stressed by the weird system drift they'd been seeing, to resort to full manual control. High-stakes, manual control right at the beginning of an escalating crisis. Panic stations.
Okay, so the operators are scrambling, the automated defenses are down. Now, Vostok moves to seize absolute digital control, right? Getting their hands on the controls directly. How did they do that?
They went after the engineering workstations again, the HMIs, and they exploited a simple, frankly decades-old technical flaw, a memory-based vulnerability. Specifically, a classic buffer overflow flaw, likely present in the firmware or the control software running on those workstations.
A buffer overflow. That sounds old school.
It is old school, and its success here just highlights the massive amount of technical debt that often exists in the OT world, in critical infrastructure. These systems aren't patched as often, the code isn't always written with modern security practices in mind.
So how does a buffer overflow work, simply?
Simply put, a buffer overflow happens when a program tries to store more data in a temporary memory location, the buffer, than it was originally designed to hold. It's like pouring too much water into a small glass.
Okay.
In this case, Vostok sent a carefully crafted piece of data to the vulnerable software on the workstation. Too much data. It literally spilled over the allocated memory space, overwriting adjacent memory areas. And by doing that, they were able to inject and then execute their own arbitrary code on the workstation, giving them instant high privileges, system-level access, essentially hands-on keyboard control of the HMI human-machine interface systems. They were now digitally sitting in the operator's chair, able to issue any command, looking like a legitimate operator to the rest of the system.
Wow. Okay. So with HMI control, they effectively become the digital saboteur. Now let's break down the specific attack methods they use, the technical tricks, to actually manipulate the physical grid devices and shut things down. The source mentions three main ones.
Yeah. They executed a coordinated three-pronged digital assault on the physical hardware out in the substations. Very targeted. First, they used a server-side request forgery, SSRF attack.
SSRF. Okay, what's that?
Here, the attacker, controlling that compromised engineering workstation, the HMI, essentially manipulates the central control server into initiating requests on the attacker's behalf. The server itself is tricked into sending unauthorized commands out to the field devices like the PLCs. It looks like the command is coming from the trusted central server.
So it bypasses controls.
It can bypass specific workstation-level controls or access restrictions because the request appears to originate from the legitimate, authorized central server. It's confusing the system's internal trust relationships.
Okay, that's one. What was the second method? Aimed at the PLCs.
The second method was deserialization attacks. These aim directly at the workhorses of the grid, the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers out in the substations.
The little computers controlling the breakers.
Exactly. Those PLCs communicate by receiving and sending data packets, often containing instructions or status updates. Biostok sent maliciously crafted data packets to specific, vulnerable PLCs. These packets were structured in a way that the PLC's software couldn't safely process or deserialize them.
What happens when it fails to deserialize?
The outcome of this failure was critical. Instead of just ignoring the bad data packet or logging an error, the vulnerable PLCs were programmed, likely for safety reasons in other contexts, to enter a predetermined fault state when they encountered data they couldn't understand. And that fault state, by design, automatically commanded the PLC to open its associated circuit breaker.
Ah, so they weaponized a safety feature.
Precisely. They triggered the fault state deliberately, causing localized shutdowns breaker by breaker.
Nasty.
Yeah.
Okay, and the third method, you described it as the most insidious, the confused deputy attack. How does that work? It sounds like it leverages the system's own trust model against itself.
That's exactly right. Imagine the legitimate grid control software, the software running on the HMI that operators normally use, as the deputy. This deputy software is inherently trusted by all the PLCs out in the field. It's the authorized commander.
Makes sense.
Vostok, now controlling the HMI where this deputy software runs, simply used the legitimate, trusted software itself to issue malicious instructions. They didn't need a separate tool. They just typed commands into the real control interface.
Like what?
Like simultaneously ordering the opening of critical circuit breakers at multiple key substations across the region. Because these commands originated from the authorized, trusted source, the deputy control software on the HMI, the PLCs receive them and process them as valid, high-priority instructions from the boss. This maximizes speed and the scale of the infrastructure collapse they were aiming for.
So 3 different technical attacks. SSRF tricking the server, deserialization crashing the PLCs, and confused deputy using the trusted software for bad deeds. The cumulative effect of these surgical digital strikes was that the immediate, unrecoverable physical crisis, the cascading failure.
Yes, this is where we pivot slightly from pure cybersecurity into the physics of electrical engineering. By strategically shutting down those specific key transmission lines and substations using that combination of attack vectors, Vostok created an instantaneous, massive, and localized imbalance. An imbalance between the power being generated by the power plants and the load, the demand, from the urban region they were targeting.
The grid couldn't handle the sudden shift.
Exactly. Power grids are incredibly complex, balanced systems. When the rest of the grid, the parts still functioning, detected this sudden, massive instability, this huge drop in load in one area, automated safety protocols kicked in everywhere else. These protocols are designed to protect the expensive physical equipment, the generators, the transformers, from catastrophic damage during such events.
So the safety systems made it worse.
In this context, yes. They triggered a widespread, unstoppable cascading failure. Protective relays tripped across the entire interconnected region, trying to isolate the problem, but actually spreading the blackout much wider within minutes. The lights went out, not just in the initial target zone, but across a vast area. That was the start of the blackout winter.
And the overwhelming instructional takeaway, the lesson from this whole technical analysis of Part 3, it seems to be this catalog of missed mitigations. It's not that Vostok used some unknowable alien technology. Every single component of this devastating multi-stage attack was successful primarily because of an unaddressed, well-known vulnerability or a failure in basic security practice at Dnipro Energo.
Absolutely. The failures are depressingly foundational. Let's list some of them. First, a catastrophic lack of robust input validation in the control systems. The systems, including the PLCs and the central server, simply accepted destructive commands without sufficient validation of the source's true intent or the integrity of the data itself. If the software interface was tricked, the system obeyed. That enabled the confused deputy and the SSRF attacks directly.
Okay, what else?
Second, secure coding practices were clearly lacking, especially in that legacy industrial firmware. The software running on the HMIs, and likely the PLCs too, lacked modern memory-safe functions or protections. That's what made those buffer overflows, the ones that granted Vostok initial HMI control. Not just possible, but relatively easy to exploit with known techniques.
And we absolutely have to focus on that infamous system maintenance failure, particularly around patching the PLCs. This seems like a huge cultural issue in the OT world, right? The fear of patching.
It is arguably the ultimate cultural failure in OT security. And it was pivotal here. That crucial software patch for the deserialization vulnerability, the very vulnerability vStock exploited to force the breakers into their fault state, that patch had been available from the vendor. It had been known, documented, and ignored by Dnipro Energo for 18 months. 18 months.
Why? Just the fear of downtime.
Primarily, yes. The management directive, common in many critical infrastructure settings, was apparently inflexible. You do not patch a running SCADA system unless absolutely necessary and with extreme caution. They feared the necessary maintenance downtime or the potential for a patch to cause unexpected operational hiccups far more than they feared the known exploitable vulnerability that could bring the whole system down. This operational paralysis, this fear of patching, was honestly vStock's greatest ally in executing the final phase.
Furthermore, reading between the lines, they must have had appalling secrets management practices internally as well, because that lateral movement inside the network, jumping from system to system, seemed way too easy.
Oh, definitely. The forensics likely found evidence that vStock discovered embedded secrets, things like API keys, service account credentials, local administrator passwords, just hard-coded directly into simple configuration files or scripts scattered across the network. Plain text, easily readable.
Ouch.
Finding these hard-coded credentials allowed the attackers to move seamlessly from one system to the next with already authorized, often elevated privileges. It completely eliminated the need for them to constantly use risky brute force methods or burn more valuable zero-day exploits for every internal hop. It made moving laterally trivial.
And finally, it brings us right back around, full circle, to the starting point of the invasion, a total breakdown in dependency management and third-party risks.
Exactly. The entire catastrophe hinged initially on that lack of effective third-party vendor risk assessment and security enforcement for that small German software house. The lesson is crystal clear. If you grant trust to a third party, especially one whose software runs in your critical environment, you must rigorously assess and continuously verify their security practices. You inherit their risk.
Yeah. Trust but verify rigorously.
Rigorously. So the final forensic investigation, when they put all the pieces together, likely used something like the diamond model of intrusion analysis, connecting all the components. The specific adversary, SOSTOC, the state actor, their unique capabilities, custom malware, supply chain expertise, patience, the infrastructure they used, that compromised vendor server, the cloud C2 channels, and the victim, Dnipro Energo's complex hybrid IT/OT network with its specific vulnerabilities.
And the conclusion?
The inescapable conclusion was that this disaster wasn't primarily due to some unbeatable exotic new threat that nobody could have predicted. It was, at its core, a complete organized failure to execute fundamental, well-understood security and operational best practices across the board. #outro.
Wow, what an indispensable analysis. Grim, yes, but absolutely essential for anyone in security or infrastructure to understand. So acting as instructors one last time, let's try to synthesize the 3 core high-level takeaways from this Blackout Winter case study. What should every organization listening take away from Dnipro Energo's failure?
Yeah, it's crucial to boil it down. Security failure, as we've just walked through in painful detail, it's rarely just a single event, is it? It's almost always a compounding series of ignored risks, missed signals, and poor decisions over time. So if I had to pick 3 core instructional lessons from this whole saga, they have to be anticipate, see, and act.
Okay, anticipate. See, act. Let's break those down. Anticipate. What does that mean in practice, based on this case?
Anticipate means you absolutely must shift your organizational culture, your mindset, away from just checkbox compliance towards true threat-informed defense.
Yeah.
You have to actively model the specific resources, motivations, and patience of your highest-level potential adversaries. Maybe that's state actors like vStock, maybe it's sophisticated criminal groups. You have to assume that a breach, a compromise, is not just possible but probable, maybe even inevitable.
Assume breach.
Assume breach. And therefore, you must prioritize detecting that internal lateral movement, that east-west traffic, as much, if not more, than just bragging about firewall blockage rates at the perimeter. Know your likely enemy and plan for them being inside.
Okay, that's anticipate. Next is see. What's the lesson there?
C is all about establishing intelligent, integrated monitoring and visibility. That absolutely demands breaking down that historical IT/OT wall.
Yeah.
You must find ways to safely and securely integrate those critical ICS and SCADA logs from the operational environment into your central SAM or security analytics platform. You can't defend what you can't see.
Right.
And seeing also means adopting more sophisticated, context-aware behavioral benchmarking, specifically tailored to your industrial or operational environment, not just applying office worker rules. And critically, you have to ruthlessly tune and prioritize your alerts based on actual asset criticality and potential impact, specifically to prevent that crippling alert fatigue that blinded Dnipro Energo's SOC. See the signals to the noise.
Makes sense. Anticipate, see, and finally act. What's the core message of ACT?
ACT means you must rigorously enforce security fundamentals, consistently, especially when they are operationally inconvenient. That means patch those critical known vulnerabilities, especially in mission-critical systems like PLCs. Don't let the fear of downtime paralyze you into inaction. Find safe ways to do it.
Yeah.
ACT also means enforce strict input validation on all control systems. Utilize modern memory-safe coding practices whenever developing or procuring firmware and software for critical systems to eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities like buffer overflows. Implement robust secrets management, no hard-coded passwords, and maintain rigorous third-party and software dependency management. Don't let known, unmitigated vulnerabilities linger, because, as Dnipro Energo learned, those known weaknesses are the catastrophic keys an attacker like Vostok will use to unlock your destruction.
Anticipate, see, act. Powerful summary.
At the end of the day, the story of Dnipro Energo is just a chilling, stark testament to the fact that in critical infrastructure security, and frankly in all cybersecurity, complacency isn't just dangerous. Complacency is the ultimate catalyst for catastrophe.
Well said. Before we wrap up this deep dive, we do want to leave you, our listeners, with a final provocative thought. Something that builds on the complexity we saw, particularly with that subtle data poisoning campaign against the AI model. Here it is. If a sophisticated geopolitical APT group like Vostok can spend months patiently leveraging subtle data poisoning to manipulate automated systems, carefully designing the malicious output to look exactly like normal system drift or noise, then how can any organization establish reliable, ongoing trust in their machine learning and AI models, especially after a successful breach has been detected? Or even during what seems like normal operations? How do you effectively unpoison the data well, retrain the model, and truly rebuild confidence when the adversary's specific goal was to fundamentally undermine that very trust in the first place?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Definitely food for thought. It requires a really deep reassessment of how we validate and maintain model integrity in this era of persistent, sophisticated threats. How do you trust the machine when you know the data might have been subtly compromised for months?
Something for all of us to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, this instructional breakdown of the lessons learned, however harsh, from the Blackout Winter. We hope it was valuable.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.